Coming up England by a different line. For once, early in the cold new year, we stopped and watching men with number plates sprint down the platform to familiar gates. Why, Coventry, I exclaimed. I was born here. I leant far out and squinted for a sign that this was still the town that had been mine so long, but found I wasn't even clear which side was which. From where those crystal crates were standing, had we annually departed for all those family holes? A whistle went. Things moved. I sat back, staring at my boots. Was that, my friend smiled, where you have your roots? No, only where my childhood was unspent, I wanted to retort. Just where I started. By now I've got the whole place clearly charted. Our garden first, where I did not invent blinding theologies of flowers and fruits, and wasn't spoken to by an old hat. And here we have that splendid family I never ran to when I got depressed, the boys all biceps and the girls all chest. Their comic Ford, their farm, where I could be really myself. I'll show you, come to that, the bracken where I never trembling sat, determined to go through with it, where she lay back, and all became a burning mist. And in those offices my doggerel was not set up in blunt 10-point, nor read by a distinguished cousin of the mayor, who didn't call and tell my father, there before us had we the gift to see ahead. You look as if you wished the place in hell, my friend said, judging from your face. Oh well, I suppose it's not the place's fault, I said. Nothing, like something, happens anywhere.
Truth be told, I associate Philip Larkin with all rail travel in general. That whole poetry of departures feeling that he's got. Not just I remember, but the fumes and furnace glare of Sheffield, changing and eating that awful pie, all of that sort of thing. It was my first view of Coventry, the train station, perhaps unsurprisingly, a night in the mid-80s, carrying the gear for Pot Will Eat Itself, still at that time named Wild and Wandering, ask a grown-up, supporting a band called House Gang somewhere in the city centre, I long forget. But my memory is of having to lift the amplifiers over the closed barriers at the end of the night. Tell me more, I hear you say. But before I digress too far, that wasn't the first time I'd thought of Coventry. I'd thought of it in relation to Scar, to the specials, Jerry Dammer's The Coventry Gap, that lovely, organic, unforced, racial, cultural, musical mix that seemed to have happened here. I thought of that long before the Blitz or the Cathedral or any of the cultural epithets of the place. And after that, it was the limit of the known world, of course. It was the furthest place you could travel from Stourbridge with your West Midlands bus pass for free. Our house has gone, just scooped out of the earth, wrote Larkin in one of over 5,000 letters to his mother, Eva. Of Pen Vaughan, his childhood home from the age of 5 to 18, which used to sit somewhere over there. I know the feeling. I remember when they pulled down Tanhouse, Byron House, the flats I used to live in Collygate. I was away at the time. But there's just a patch of sky where my bedroom used to be. He's good for a bit of transience and impermanence, is Phil. That sense of everything coming to an end, most things will never happen, this one will. That million-petaled flower of being here. It's difficult to imagine now, the light of the street lamp on the leaves outside Larkin's bedroom window at Pen Vaughan, isn't it? He used to come home for lunch. Seems to evoke a more relaxed, informal time. However, his friend Colin Gunner remembered the intense formality of the place, saying if you put a speck on the floor it was like spitting on the altar. The name Penvaughan, for all of its mystery, is just a conflation of the builder's name. It was built by a guy called Percy Vernon Venables, and it also for me evokes that whole miniature world of house names that I grew up mystified by, sort of echoes of Edwardiana, Glentworth, Lyndhurst, Elmdene, Roseley, Poonar, half romantic folly, half plant, half faded echoes of the Raj, with a whiff of Diary of a Nobody by George Grossmith. I am aware of the three halves problem there, by the way. It makes you wonder if they were going to apply a similar system today, what kind of names would we use to romanticise things like that in front of us now? What do you think, Harris?
Mirrorvale.
Mirrorvale, that's brilliant. God, that's much better than I would have done. I was going to go all full J.G. Ballard craftwork on you, but no, you've plumbed the heart of the matter. Mirrorvale, beautiful.
King Henry VIII School. Nice of them really to name a school or anything after him after he smashed up their first cathedral, beginning that Coventrian tradition of busting up cathedrals. He didn't do it personally, but it was on his behest, I assume. Poor little Philip joined at the age of 8. He published his first prose in the Coventrian, in the school magazine, and there is of course a room named after him. So how would you feel, once again Lee, to have a room named after you?
Well, my name is quite common, so I'd be fairly indifferent to...
Not this again, just think of something more interesting to say.
Okay, well, how would you feel about having a room named after you?
Well, I haven't thought of anything.
Right. Well, how about the, like those quiet rooms they used to have where you can go in and read the paper and so on and have a whiskey, but
in Parliament.
but you're not allowed. Yeah, in
Yeah.
Parliament you're not allowed to speak. So you could have the Cummings silent room, which is entirely in keeping with your character.
Very much so. I like that, Lee. Yeah. I'm sorry for earlier. I'm sorry for my outburst. I feel chastened now. It's a nice idea. And yeah, I get it, that all this too will pass away, but the demise of some things would sadden me much more than others. These fabulous concrete Coventry pebble dash Gaudi-esque stucco work, for instance. Beautifully emblematic of the time and just aging enough now to be really exciting. While I was trying to formulate that sentence, it crossed my mind that it had nothing to do with Philip Larkin, and that's fine, it doesn't matter if it's just about Coventry, but it actually had got quite a lot to do with Larkin, because I realised that I've got that constant struggle when I'm speaking to economise my speech, to attach verbs to adverbs, to abstract nouns, so that I get as much information in as possible. And I realise that comes directly from him, those Sunday full and organ frowned on spaces, those holiday fattened shelves in Coventry Library that he described, and that incredible economy of speech which I can't aspire to, I nonetheless do.
Sidney Larkin's place of work looming behind us, where he worked as city treasurer, and as imposing a piece of Tudor revival as I think you'll find anywhere. It's funny that so relatively recently we had the bravura to fumble around in the past for a bit of architectural role play. I wonder when that's going to happen again, judging by the proposed building on the hoarding to the side of us. Not any time soon. Whole lot of Larkin stuff at the Herbert, of course, in the archives, including a punishment book from King Henry VIII. Don't know exactly what it says in there. Would there be any mention of you in a punishment book from your school, Lee?
No, unlikely.
Were you just such a good lad?
I just can't remember there being particular. So I started secondary school when they were outlawing the cane.
Yeah, I just finished just at that point. So,
84.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think a punishment book would have been possible at Oxford Hospital, as punishment was really the norm. You were punished for not sitting up straight, and if your hair touched the collar, and if your fingernails were dirty. So it would have had to have been a pretty big book. Larkin was baptised in Coventry Cathedral. Philip Arthur Larkin, after the poet Philip Sidney. We know he came back here on many an occasion. Jazz artists George Webb and Duke Ellington played the cathedral in '66. He came back here in 1973 to receive a doctorate from Warwick University on what he described as an extraordinary weekend. When I first came here, I didn't get it, I'm ashamed to say. Maybe, in my defence, the 50s, when this was designed by Basil Spence, wasn't that long ago. Things from the 50s were still being televised. The Munsters, the Addams Family, the Beverly Hillbillies on a Friday night. And I just couldn't quite see through time enough to see its greatness. I can see it now. I think it's a stupendous piece of work, both in and out. The follies of a man's youth, they say, are in retrospect glorious when compared to the follies of his old age. Not so the architectural opinions of a man's youth, it would seem. Do you know what really gets me as well? When you look at Lincoln Cathedral, you don't think, there's the 10th century bit, there's the 11th century bit, there's the Middle Ages, etc., etc. You see the thing as one whole, uniform, satisfying whole, like Salisbury Cathedral, which was all built of a piece. It's not going to be that long, historically, before this looks of a piece, before you can't see the joins. Exhilarating stuff, eh?
Statue is called Reconciliation. Says this sculpture by Josefina de Vasconcelos has been given by Richard Branson as a token of reconciliation. What do you think transpired for the city of Coventry and Richard Branson to have to be reconciled.
Yeah. But someone must have had to do a bit of negotiation between them, and they must have had to do some restorative conversations. You know, like when two kids fall out at school, put them in a room.
So it's effectively a mediation.
Yeah.
Richard presumably there is on the left.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah,
and I don't know, on the right is
Godiva.
Representing,
Lady Godiva representing the city. Do you think it was about one of his Virgin Airline meals, like that famous letter?
It could well be.
About his horrible beard and hair.
It could well be.
Yeah. Lady Godiva, of course. Lady Godiva's Operation. Lady Godiva Rides Again. Obscure 1951 film. Begins with shots of empty platforms and that voice intoning, "There are no trains at platform 1. There are no trains at platform 2. There are no trains at platform 3, 4 or 5," or something like that. That is because it is Sunday. But the notable thing about the film is that they don't know how people from Coventry speak in movie land. Some of them have northern accents and some of them are chirpy Cockney sparrows, as if the Midlands is somewhere where both places reside. And I think the Midlands still suffers from that great well of ignorance, doesn't it, about it. But Larkin himself was embarrassed by what he called his queer Coventry vowels in radio broadcasts. A little bit like the Chatterley Band and the Beatles' first LP, that deification of the provinces made cool, came a little too late for him. Millennium Place is built on the site of the old Art Deco Dance Palace, which was a mecca for English dance acts like Jack Payne and Billy Cotton that Larkin liked at the time enormously, before his tastes changed to Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong, the Americans. A little bit like when I bought my first Associates record back in 1982 and betrayed the Human League's code of still vocals and synthesizers only.
So, walking around, Coventry having the reputation it's got, architecturally, post-war and all that, and then you've got all these actually really impressive little fragments of the old medieval city.
Like the one we're in,
so we're on Spon Street, which is pretty impressive actually. It just makes me wonder. So Larkin was born in 1922. And he would have left here in 1940. World War II was happening. And just imagine that you leave the place that you grew up in at the age of 18, and then the next thing more or less that happens to it is that it gets bombed to smithereens. And it's quite literally, you can never go home again. No wonder his outlook ended up being so kind of nostalgic and...
I don't know if I've ever thought about it in those terms, actually. That's very true, isn't it? Because, that whole sort of early death awareness, that sense of impermanence, that sense of nothing connecting to the past properly, I think is possible. I mean, if I'd have gone to Liverpool University and then my mum had rung me and said, "Sorry Dan, Stourbridge has been bombed," it would have had a cataclysmic effect on your whole psyche, wouldn't it? On your whole outlook. I hadn't thought about that.
We're both from the West Midlands. and there's a whole generation of West Midlanders from Coventry at that time that underwent what is effectively, in terms of the built environment, an annihilation event.
Yeah.
And I don't remember seeing much recorded about that. I mean, I could be wrong about that.
No, it doesn't seem to be massively documented, does it? The bombing of Coventry. It's there in everyone's consciousness, but I don't think there's as much written about it as perhaps there should be. But no, that would have been a major influence, obviously, on his burgeoning mind, wouldn't it? Incredible, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyway, just speaking of this place, I mean, it is, and surviving precious fragments. This is one of those special places, isn't it? It's like the White Horse in Beverley, labyrinthine, dark, just dripping in atmosphere, and don't want to be pejorative about the Philip Larkin pub up in town, but this is my preferred venue, and of course it leads me to ask the question: if how would you feel if they were going to name a pub after you?
My name's pretty common, so you know that's not something I've really thought very much about.
A little down the way, down the hill there, is a plaque commemorating Angela Brazil, little known writer of healthy period pieces about active girl heroines in Larkin's childhood. Funnily enough, he went through a phase of writing stories emulating her style. So what, I hear you say? Well, here's the thing. If you were going to fabricate a pseudonym for an imaginary author of stories about active girl heroines, could you possibly come up with a better one than Brunette Coleman, the one he worked under? It's brilliant, isn't it? Brunette Coleman. It is, to imaginary pseudonyms for writers of stories about active girl heroines, what Sredni Vashtar is to names for deified polecat ferrets of the Edwardian era. Because, plumbing the heart of the matter, Larkin was brilliant with the written word, dazzlingly brilliant. I can only think of William Shakespeare, sorry to be obvious, who occupies the channels of my mind so thoroughly. They are, of course, both from the West Midlands. And I am, as they say these days, just saying. A strong, unhindered moon, blurred playground noises beyond black-stockinged nurses, bright knots of rail, the strength and pain of being young, vast moth-eaten musical brocade, waking at 4 to soundless dark, Sunday full and organ frowned on spaces, in whose blent air all our compulsions meet, sun-comprehending glass, the million-petalled flower of being here, crouching below extinction's alp, canal and clouds and colleges subside, age and then the only end of age, audacious purifying elemental move, immobile locked three-handed struggle, ruin bibber, randy for antique, the river's level drifting breadth.